Oh yeah, so the next one is the Express one that I just put in the chat. I'm just sharing the example also via Twitter in case there's people who like come across this later and are not here but might want to give it a try. Okay, cool. Yeah, so my hint for you for this one is if you just want to sort of like copy and paste one of these up into the pattern and just like start abstracting things away, you know, like turning something into the ellipsis operator if it doesn't matter. If you don't know what the variable name or attribute is going to be, just make it a meta variable instead and just use that consistently. And also remember the deep expression matching operator for this last guy is sort of the trick there. So yeah, I'll give you another minute or two, and we'll do the next one. So shout out to Hardword6. This looks like a correct solution to me. So let's quickly see how and why it works. So if we just copy this code in, we can say, well, the path doesn't matter. We don't know what the request and response variable might look like, what the name might be. So let's just replace those. This could be some like variable name. We don't know what it is, but eventually it's going to get passed down to that. And yeah, this is some sort of like query name thing. Some stuff might happen in the middle. So if we do that, we can find this first case, but the second case, because it's not just that user-controlled object, we need to do the deep expression matching. Let's see, oh, sorry, this actually should be response. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to change this one too. Right. Yep. Excellent job. You also get
I like the minions.
The minions? Okay. Yeah, the minion ones are great. Okay, so Jeremy had a question. Unfortunately, this version doesn't seem to work. Let's see what we have here. Ooh, pasting, yikes. Okay, maybe. Maybe I'll just like copy this and then let's see. So, okay, see you, Andre. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, so this and then rec res. Oh, okay, yeah. So basically, it's like, oh, can you just do it all into here? Yeah, so I think the reason this is not working is probably because this isn't like a direct passing it in, because you're assigning it to a variable first, and we're sort of modeling that. If we were to add a case like, this, that probably would work, I imagine. Yeah, so conceptually, if you're like, oh, there's a couple of ways this could manifest in code, we could just add a couple of cases. And that is actually like in the official rules. If you look at the Express.js cross-site scripting ones, that is how a lot of them are, because we're expressing like different ways that this malicious code flow could happen. But yeah, that's a good question. Okay, cool. Let's see. So
why is it that in that request.query.name you are putting a $ like param or $name? Mine seemed to match without it. What am I missing?
Sorry, here or?
Yeah, if you didn't put param but just put .name, not that specifically.
Oh yeah. Just like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically here, that is going to work because like the query parameter you're pulling out is exactly name, but if you were to say like instead of name it was like email, or like some variable or some like attribute name that's not just name.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So the goal of like making this a meta variable as well is we don't care what that value is.
I got it.
But yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so basically my process is I sort of look at it and I'm like, okay, what has to be the same and like what could vary, and then anything that could vary I try to sort of abstract away.
Yeah, I misunderstood. I didn't read the code carefully enough to see that it was not a specific case, but that was a generic way that it modeled the query string params. It's been a while since I've done JavaScript UI.
Yeah, I probably should have given it a better variable name so that was more clear. But yeah, good question. Okay, so yeah, so Kevin asks, is anyone building Semgrep rules into IDEs like Eclipse or IntelliJ? Given it's way easier to write rules, it seems like it would be a great addition to SecBugs. Yeah, so in fact, yeah, so there actually is a VS Code extension for it already. And as of yesterday, I learned that a friend of mine has actually written sort of a prototype extension for IntelliJ. So they haven't released it yet, but they probably will sometime in the next, maybe after Christmas. But yeah, so you can, if you use VS Code, you can use this today. If you have a different IDE, we'll probably add that in the next couple of quarters. It is an ask we're getting a lot from people, so it is probably something we're going to focus on next year. So yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so yeah, any other questions? Cool. Well, yeah, feel free to interrupt me anytime.
Oh, one quick thing I noticed in the way that that's written, starting with the original code, you include like var, but if somebody happened to use const or let, that would be a problem. So it looks like if you want to generify it further, you just remove, the var or let and just say any assignment. You don't care what it is.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think, yeah, so I think if this is like a let or a const, it might still work. I think Semgrep might be able to reason that that is like functionally equivalent. But let's try.
If the rule has var and the code has var or let, it'll work. But if the rule has let and the code has var, it won't match.
Oh,
so it might be. So if you want to catch any assignment, you don't care, what scoping that is, then maybe it seems like you can just exclude the var. match any assignment?
Yeah, let's try. So you were saying like if we make this like a let or a
Const.
Yeah, let's. So we did actually find both of those.
Yeah, but if you change the rule to a let, it will probably only find one of them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so var, when you're like doing assignments, var seems to match var or let or const, but yeah, let will only match let, and I think those are like semantically different. I think part of
Just
this.
be careful, I guess, how you're writing your rule. If it doesn't depend on the scoping of the variable, you probably should just skip it.
Yeah, there is some sort of like art in how we determine like how should Semgrep behave, and I think one of the decisions we made is based on how people were writing rules, that normally they were like, well, when I write var something, I sort of expect it to match these other things, but because let and const have more specific meanings, we're like, well, we can't really go like the other way. But yeah, that's a good point. There is some subtleties, so I would encourage, just try as you write a rule, be like, oh, what are the things I expect to match, and like, am I actually matching those? But yeah, great point.
Oh, it's interesting. It looks like if you split the definition of the declaration from the assignment, it doesn't work. Let's see.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a way to match regardless of whether it's a direct var something or assigning to a variable that already exists in scope?
Yeah, so we do have some. Thanks for joining. Yeah, so Jeremy pointed out that if we like take out like the var, like this will match all the cases, which is a good point. And then Jason, your point was like, what if there's like a series of assignments or calculations that eventually lead to it? We do have some initial work that does do basically exactly that. It's not quite ready for prime time, to be honest, but it is something we're working on. So as sort of like a short-term fix, you could sort of like have a couple of cases to say like, these are like, the variable getting passed around a few different times, which is not a great answer. I agree with you, but it is something we are building into the engine in the not too distant future.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Let's see. So we've talked a couple of times. I don't know why. It's, basically, let's hypothesize we have like some business logic that we would like to enforce. So we've been talking about like security issues so far. So what if, for example, this hypothetical financial trading application, there's like transaction objects that we need to call like verify on before we pass them to make a transaction. And if like we just directly make a transaction, that's bad. Or if we call them in the wrong order, that's bad. You can imagine us doing some sort of like sanity checking or vetting of if the right attributes have been set and so forth. So I like this example because it's not necessarily just a security check. It's like, oh, what are some like business logic things that we want to enforce that are specific to our application? So let's see, this is looking wonky. Okay, so let's say here we have verify called before make, that's okay. Or if we just call make, that's bad. If we call them in the wrong order, that's bad. But just calling verify, that's okay. And there could be like other statements in the middle. So conceptually, what we can do here is say, find all functions. We don't necessarily care what the return type is. We don't necessarily care what the function name is. arguments, whatever. Somewhere in there, they call make transaction. Let's see, question from Kevin. Let's see, I know you said that you weren't focusing on control or data flow analysis, but if there was a way in the Semgrep rules to mark something as tainted and then check it later, then that would allow you to add checks for output encoding and so forth. Yep, totally agree. So we do, like when you use meta variables and like you use it here and then there, like we are doing some control and data flow analysis already. Like we're not doing it like across many files, but within one function or within one file, we are doing that to a limited extent. And also that's how we know that, as we saw in previous examples, that something is like a constant string, even if it's not defined right there, like it could be in a previous variable or something like that. And we sort of propagate that knowledge. Yeah, so we do have like some initial support for like intra-file taint analysis. To be honest, this is like sort of like early stages and not sort of a main focus, but that is something that we will probably be fleshing out in the next year or so. So, yep. Nilesh asks, is it possible for CVE data to be linked to these code patterns? Yeah, that's a good question. So one nice thing about using this YAML syntax is that you can actually add in like an additional metadata key. Yeah, CVE or CWE. There's this metadata tag in any rule where you can actually put whatever you want in there. So if you go to, let's see, Semgrep rules, let's see, let's search for CWE. Yeah, so this is an example rule. This is just in the Semgrep rules GitHub repo. So you can actually see that there's this metadata tag, and we just have added this like OWASP key for like which OWASP top 10 issue it's related to, or CWE for which CWE it references. So what's nice about this metadata tag is like whatever you put in there, Semgrep will just arbitrarily or just blindly pass that into the JSON output, or just print it to the screen if that's what you want. So basically, like if you have some organization specific identifiers or like you want to like slice and dice the data, you can put whatever you want in here, and it just works. We are not opinionated about what goes into this sort of blanket metadata key. There's probably docs on that as well. Yeah, so if you sort of go to the docs page and search for metadata, it's basically like, yeah, put whatever you want in there.
Just a suggestion to you, Clint, if you're going to start writing rules that have OWASP top 10 stuff in it, you might want to put the year in it too, because they change like every couple of years.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, when we started doing that, we were like, oh, this is going to be a pain. Yeah, so one thing we're currently working on is doing like versioned rules where you can say like, yeah, this is like V0 of this rule, or tie it to some specific release or date or something like that. Basically exactly for that version, which is...
right, but I mean, it's like CVEs and CWEs are basically stable. They don't change, but the OWASP top 10 does, so.
Yeah, definitely. And by being able to say like we could have... well, yeah, you're right. I agree. Another sort of, I think, related problem we have is like what happens if people are using one version of a rule and then we like change or improve that rule over time? Like how do we sort of like with like a Docker image or whatever, where you have sort of like this release or like latest or whatever, we probably will do something similar in rules.
Right.
That's not there yet, but yeah, that is that is a limitation we are well aware of. But yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. Okay, cool. So, yeah, why? Oh yeah, so there are some things that you just that are not supported in the simple editor. So if you like make some changes in the advanced tab and then switch back, it will sometimes be mad at you. But here, I think that that's okay. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is find every function that calls make transaction anywhere inside it, and then filter out the cases where verify is called first. So conceptually, it's like, what are all of the functions that potentially could be bad, and then filter out the cases that we know are safe. So if we look here, this function we're calling make transaction, but we're not verifying it first, so that's bad. If we call them in the wrong order, that's bad. Just calling verify, that's safe, no problem. There could be other statements in the middle. That's what the ellipsis operators are for. And this last example is interesting because we actually are calling verify and make in the right order, but we are passing this other transaction object instead of this one, so other versus t. So this is a false negative. Like probably we care about this case, but we are not accurately catching it currently. But what we can do is change this to $t and $t to say these must refer to the same variable, and then we do appropriately flag this case. So again, the point of this example is like we had this idea in our head of something we want to find, and then we found it in like 9 lines of code or so. So this is something you could roll out in CI.
Is there a way to deal with that ancestral function? So if verify is called in a parent function or a parent function of a function, can it detect that in the ancestry of?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like maybe in real complex code, there's like some like there's this one function that's calling verify inside, and then it calls this other function. Other stuff happens, then it calls a different function, and then like make transaction eventually happens. And you want to know like in this program path, are these property hold? Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say currently that is not directly supported. You could potentially chain some Semgrep calls together to try doing something like that, but that is something that we would like to support in the not too distant future. But currently, I would say that's not trivial to express. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so there are, I think, some excellent use cases and desired features that you all are pointing out that I very much appreciate, and is something I want as well. So yeah, there's a number of things on our roadmap that not quite there yet, unfortunately, but hopefully not too long. Okay, so just doing a time check. I think, so I do have another challenge here that I may just let you all solve asynchronously. I will you have access to the slides, I'll tweet it out. But it's just like another example of a business logic thing that you might want to implement where like, oh, maybe you need to call, if you call some function, you need to call it like twice or more for whatever reason. It's kind of a random example, but it's really just to demonstrate, this could be arbitrary things that you might want to find. Let's see. So we already called out the VS Code extension. So we've been writing rules so far, but let's say you're like, well, I just kind of want stuff out of the box. So again, you could use like a CI rule set or more of like a security auditor rule set. Something I'm going to talk about more in a second is we have some packs for enforcing secure guardrails. Also, just like, again, like development best practices, we have some checks for that, not just security. And one thing that's kind of nice is rather than running a bunch of different security tools, you could, we actually ported a number of the open source security tools checks to Semgrep patterns. So you can take a look at how those look. So you could get, Bandit's Python checks or ESLint checks or Java's FindSec bug checks or, GoSex checks or Node.js scan, which actually uses Semgrep as its rule engine, by the way, which is kind of interesting. If you want to just like search all of the rules itself, you could do that as well via this sort of explore and then rules tab. And you can filter by like language or category or sort of like arbitrary text. So if you were like, show me the like JWT rules, you could see those. If you wanted to, I don't know, filter just to like Golang, you could do those. So yeah, like sort of like whatever you want to do. Let's see, probably React should be all languages. Yeah, so feel free to explore that. And again, this is just like a nice front end for this Semgrep rules repo. And I think we pull in rules from a couple of other Git repos, not just this one, like from the community. But this is just sort of a clean way to search. Let's see. So to be honest, I don't think I'm going to have time to go through this part in detail, but I do want to mention it at least a bit. So
we can make it part 2 and have it in the January section.
Cool. Yeah, that would be fun. So I'll maybe just give you like a brief overview, and the slides are already public. They're on Twitter as well, and I think I linked them in the Zoom chat, but I'll link them again at the end. So basically, this is sort of like a condensed version of a global AppSec SF talk that my colleague Isaac and I gave. And it's really just like, okay, assuming you buy into the vision of like secure defaults and guardrails and paved road, like how do you actually do this in an organization? It's sort of like more, like we've been very tactical with like Semgrep rule writing so far, but this is more like philosophically at an organization level, how do you roll this out? And the answer is like, it's hard, it's not easy, but this is an approach that I've seen a number of companies use to reasonable success. It's again, like probably a multi-month or multi-quarter effort, not like you just do this in a day. But this is sort of like a high-level approach, and I'm not going to go through it in detail because I think it makes sense to maybe do some hands-on stuff together, but I would be happy to chat more about this later. So basically, the first step is like, which vulnerability class do we care about? Then like, how do we actually find that at scale or prevent it at scale? And then, what does good look like? How can we make that the default? And then how do we train developers to use the safe pattern? And then use tools, it could be Semgrep or any tool, to enforce the safe pattern. So from like a 30,000 foot view, this is the approach. So there's lots of criteria you could use. I'm not going to go through these, but here's some sort of heuristics that can be useful. Where do you find the vulnerabilities to work on? Well, if you have a good vulnerability management program, you can do that. Ideally, you have like a list of vulnerabilities you can review to try to target. This is coming from your issue trackers or maybe your commits, or if you have security tools or pen test reports. And then basically you're going to look at those for trends, like does the vulnerable code look similar? And then ideally you're like, okay, what's like a widespread issue that's high risk that we can target? I include this to point out that there's a lot of different approaches. We're going to focus on, just lightweight static analysis because it's like too much to talk about everything, but that's not always the best approach depending on what you're targeting. So what safe patterns should you use? Obviously, I'm a big fan of OWASP. So there's some cheat sheets in the ASVS project, making it the default. So there's like probably an internal coding docs and different things like that. And the developer productivity team, I think, is a nice insertion point. So training developers to use the pattern, you need to communicate like, hey, this is what I want you to do. You can't just sort of expect them to know what's in your head. And then finally, enforcing the tools. So yeah, I'll probably in the future talk about this in more detail, but I just wanted to give you like a brief overview. So let's say you bought into the secure defaults and you're like, this sounds great, but it's a big, heavy lift. So we're trying to make that easier for you. So we've been chatting with the project leads for OWASP ASVS and the OWASP cheat sheets projects. And our goal is to have basically out-of-the-box support for checking, is my code compliant with ASVS level 1? And can I find code in CI as well as in the IDE that violates cheat sheets best practices? So shout out to some of these people, but this is early stages, but I think it's pretty promising. And what we've done with these XSS and insecure transport rule sets is saying like, okay, what are all the ways to, for example, like disable output encoding? And then let's like flag all of those. So we're not saying that this is definitely exploitable, but we are saying that you are potentially, there's a foot gun opportunity here. So maybe you want to either manually audit it or fix it. And similarly with this insecure transport rule pack, we're like, what are all the ways to disable TLS certificate verification? What are the ways to talk over HTTP and not HTTPS? And we basically bundled all of those so that you can just immediately roll these out. You don't have to do like a ton of upfront work. You do have to do probably a burn down of these issues over time. But we've ideally done the hard work for you. So we actually haven't talked about this publicly too much yet, so I'm excited to share it with you now. So we've created some XSS prevention cheat sheets for Django, Flask, Java, and Rails to say like basically what are all the ways to shoot yourself in the foot. So for example, it's like, well, if you use MarkSafe, you're turning off the protections. If you use safe string and so forth. And then at the bottom here, we have like, basically, if you're like a security engineer, here's probably the things you should look for. Like you could ban this function, you could ban this other thing, and so forth. And so basically everything possible, we've tried to create a corresponding Semgrep rule so that you can say like, these are sort of the secure defaults that we want to enforce, and I'll manually audit any place that that is not the case. So still a work in progress, but I think there's some pretty good coverage already. So yeah, I guess any questions about this? Sorry, this section that I sort of skimmed through was actually like a 50-minute talk in itself, but I wanted to move on to other things. But yeah, any thoughts or questions?
I think that's fantastic. I think it's where we need to get to as a profession. Like somebody comes out with a vulnerability. I remember like operationally for detection, people would say, "Oh, here's a like a snort rule to detect that." Like if we can get into the habit of, "Oh, there's this bad thing that you're supposed to do. Here's a Semgrep rule to do it," and then basically build that library over time, so that you can actually start applying them and not have to read a bunch of papers or whatever to try to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, see you, Petra. But yeah, the goal, and we've actually been working with some framework maintainers like Jacob Kaplan-Moss, who is the Django co-creator. And let's see. Yeah, so we actually, and yeah, you can sort of like see all like these specific checks, like what exactly we're looking for if you want. Oh yeah, I'll share that. But yeah, so I think our goal is like, for the people who know the frameworks the best, for the people who are domain experts in all these things, like just codify that knowledge and sort of make it available for the community so that we can all benefit. For example, like you may be an expert in Rails, but you're managing a massive team, and your company, like one of the development teams adds like Spring or Express.js, and you're like, well, I'm not an expert in that. But if we have this, again, sort of like open source community of like domain knowledge that anyone can apply for free on whatever they want, then that would be good. So yeah, that's the vision. Let's see, so Nilesh asked about sharing the Semgrep CI docs. So yeah, if you just go to docs and then search CI, you will find it, but I will also post it here. Yeah, so yeah, let's just finish this up strong. Yeah, so basically we have best support for GitHub and GitLab right now, but really any pipeline where you can run a command line tool or Docker, it'll work. So if you're curious, we've been talking about like the CLI so far. We also have like something we call Semgrep agent, which adds in some additional useful stuff. It's like diff aware, plays nicely with various code hostings, etc. Oh yeah, and just to be like totally transparent, this is sort of how I mentally model us compared to other players. And we do have this sort of like SaaS app that is useful for like managing scanning at scale. And that is not open source because that is our business model. That's how we're trying to make money. And you don't need to use it. You can use everything I've talked about, and you can use Semgrep and CI without using this. It's more just like a value add. It's not a hard requirement by any means. But the idea is like, okay, can we basically like, we observed customers who were rolling out Semgrep to hundreds or thousands of repos, and there were some problems that they kept having, like, well, how do I set my scan policy across all these repos? How do I review the results? And I want to see trends and metrics and dashboards and sort of like the enterprisey stuff. So that's basically what we're building into this. But the tool and the rules and integrating into CI is all like open source. You can do whatever you want. You don't need to talk to us. Yeah, so let's do a quick example of rolling it out to CI. So basically what we're going to head to is we're going to write a custom check to find unauthenticated routes, and we're going to set it up so that we will automatically comment on that pull request with a suggested autofix to say, hey, looks like you're not doing this, please do this.